Skin rotation flaps are a pretty common procedure in plastic surgery practices. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to code correctly for those services using CPT. Hey there, I'm Victoria. I'm a medical coder, auditor, educator, and content creator. And on my channel, I provide tips, tricks, and tutorials to help you be successful in a medical coding career. If you haven't already and you need more medical coding help, more assistance for exams, for how to build things in your practice, you definitely want to make sure that you subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you can get alerts when I post new episodes. Today's video is sponsored by Code. Code provides a full platform for you to take advantage of your medical coding skills so you can work where, when, and how much you want. If you're looking to take more control over your coding career, looking to supplement your income, or just looking to be your own boss as a medical coder, you definitely want to check out Code today. Head on over to codehealth.com. That's code with a K, K-O-D-E health.com. So thank you so much to Code for sponsoring today's video. So to start with, our code ranges for our adjacent tissue repairs are codes 14000 through 14061. They're broken down, some of them by location, and some of them by just the square centimeters, regardless of location. So we'll go through a couple of examples because I want to make sure you have a good handle on this. There are instructions in the CPT book, but one of the primary things I want you to understand first and foremost when you're looking at an adjacent tissue transfer rearrangement is that these codes, the adjacent tissue transfer rearrangement, and what is referred to as undermining are two completely different things, totally coded differently. When a provider is doing undermining, so let's say we have this opening here and we're doing our undermining. Undermining is just that sweep like underneath the tissue. So we're just kind of taking a scalpel and releasing the top layer of skin from the tissue underneath it. So undermining is really just that sweeping underneath, and those are coded more with our complex repair codes when we're repairing something and just using undermining. In order for a service to be considered a adjacent tissue transfer or a skin flap, you'll hear them often referred to as flaps, and I'll talk more about that, but they have to have a primary defect size and a secondary defect size in order for us to assign the right code to it. Technically speaking, any piece of attached tissue is considered a flap. So even if like you skin yourself and you've got that little piece of skin hanging off, that's technically considered a flap. So sometimes you'll see different terminology used that doesn't always match up exactly to what we see in the coding terminology. And there are different types of flaps that we see in CPT. There's like muscle flap codes. There are codes for pedicled flaps, but these code ranges for the 14001 through 14061, those are specifically for adjacent tissue transfers. Those have to have that primary defect size, secondary defect size. So this is one of the few areas in medical coding where you have to do a little bit of basic math calculations. So for example, if you have a lesion that was removed and they say it was a 2x2 lesion, well, these codes are based off of square centimeters for these rotation flaps. So we have to figure out the lesion size, and then we have to figure out that secondary defect size, that area that they're rotating into, and then add those together. So the primary defect, if we kind of look at this here, this would be our primary defect. This would be the excision area. So let's say we removed a large mole or a large melanoma from this area, and then the provider is going to mark out an area of skin that he's going to rotate in to fill this hole. If you're familiar with some of the lesion coding, typically you code for this lesion and then you code for the repair if it's something that is an intermediate repair or above. But when we're coding for the adjacent tissue transfer and we're covering this lesion with the adjacent tissue transfer, that takes over that lesion excision code. So we don't code one code for the excision and then another code for the tissue rotation. It's all going to get encompassed in the tissue rotation code, unless of course this would be like a more involved lesion removal like a lipoma or something. If we take a look at the codes, we can see here some of them are broken down by the location. So here we have trunk with the defect that's 10 square centimeters or less. Then we have 10.1 to 30. And then we have our next area, scalp, arms, or legs. Then we have our next area, forehead, cheeks, chin, mouth, neck, axilla, genitalia, hands and or feet. And then we have our more delicate areas, our eyelids, nose, ears, and lips. And the reason we have these broken down by different location is When something's more involved, more sensitive, more complex, we're going to reimburse that higher, right? Like that's a more intense procedure. It's going to require more time or more skill, more possibly even tools. So that's something that we want to reimburse the provider more for. Even if you think about something like, and I'm sorry, I keep referring back to cake, but I can go to Walmart and pick up a sheet cake and it's going to be pretty nice. But if I want something that's more ornate, I have to pay more. If I want something that is done by a specialized baker, that's going to cost more. Same thing when we're working with more delicate procedures, and that's why we have separate codes to reimburse them more. Or if we're asking for a larger area or a larger cake, it's going to cost more. Now, one of the critical things, though, to keep in mind is that once we go over that 30 square centimeters, we change our codes completely. We go with this 14301 code, which is our 30.1 square centimeters to 60 square centimeters, and then we have an add-on code that gets added on to that, our 14302, for each additional 30 or part thereof. So even if it isn't a full 30, if it's just a 0.5, it would still get coded over. So if we have 60.5, we would code our 14301 for that first 60 square centimeters. That extra part thereof, that 0.5, we would still get a full 14302 for that. So I have a couple of examples here that we can kind of take a look at. So this one is a patient that has a squamous cell carcinoma of the forehead. It was removed and repaired by adjacent tissue transfer and rearrangement. We have both our primary and secondary defect size. Primary defect was 1 by 2 centimeters. Secondary defect was 2 by 3 centimeters. So this is where I talked about we have to do some math. So our 1 by 2, that's our first defect size. That equals 2. And then our secondary defect size is 2 by 3, and that equals 6. That's how we calculate square centimeters or area. We take the length times the width. That gives us the total square centimeters. So now we add the square centimeters from defect 1 and defect 2. So our 2 plus 6, and that will total our 8. Which means we're doing 8 square centimeters of the forehead. So 8 square centimeters of the forehead, we go back to our book here, to scalp, legs. Here's our forehead code, and we're at 8. So we're at that 10 square centimeters or less. So we're gonna fall here in our 14040. Now these aren't add-on codes, so we don't add on for each additional for these, not until we get to that 30 or more threshold. So the 14040 is this one. If it was between this range, if we had a 12 square centimeter, we would just use 14041 because that's within this range. These aren't add-on codes. This one here with the plus sign is our add-on code. So once we hit that 30.1 threshold, that it's over 30 square centimeters, that's when we start jumping up here, and we don't use our add-on code till we get past that 60 and have to add on each part thereof, or each additional 30 square centimeters or part thereof. And there's a note here, this 14302 is only used in conjunction with 14301, so this should never be alone by itself. It has to be used with the 14301. Now you might see some providers will document the square centimeters, like for things like skin grafts. So they might put, 12 cm squared. And that way you don't have to do any calculations there, because you don't take that and like 12 by 12, it's already the square centimeters. So that cm squared is already square centimeters. So you don't have to do the calculations then. That is the same as this here where it says the square centimeters, cm squared. Now my next example here, we have a benign nevus. It was removed from the patient's trunk. Lesion defect was 4 by 4, repaired via adjacent tissue rearrangement with secondary defect size of 8 by 8. So again, we're going to do our math of our first defect. 4 by 4 is 16. And then we have 8 times 8 is 64. Don't be afraid to get out your calculators for this, because I sure as heck am. So we have to add those together, both of our square centimeters. We have the defect 1 square centimeters is 16 plus 64. That takes us to 80. So we have 80 square centimeters. Now, when we look at our book, our first code is going to be that 14301. Remember, because once we hit over that 30 threshold, we drop to our 14301 code. So now we have to do a little bit more math beyond that. So here's our 14301. That's for the first 60 square centimeters, right? I'll actually take you back here and we'll put that down. So 14301, and that's going to be our first 60. So if we take that 80, we subtract 60 off of it, what do we have left? 20 square centimeters, right? So let's go back to our add-on code. Remember what it says about our add-on code. It's the next 30 square centimeters or part thereof. So when we have a part thereof, it's also used. So we use the full 1 unit for that part thereof, even though we don't have a full 30. So that 20 square centimeters is going to be a part thereof of the next 30. When we would keep adding that on is if we would get above 90. So 60 plus 30 is 90, right? So in order for us to have to get to a next unit of 14302, it would have to be over 90 total. So out of our total 80 square centimeters, we took out 60, and that counts for our 14301. And then we had 20 left over, so we can get our 14302 out of that for that part that's left over. So those would be the 2 codes that we would use for that removal. So that's how you code for adjacent tissue transfer or rearrangements. If you have any questions about that or you want to see me cover any different skin procedures, definitely let me know in the comments below. If you're interested in more case studies, you can check out case studies right over here. I have tons of them. I will see you guys in the next video. And until then, just keep on coding on.